If you sometimes feel like you need too much, then we need to talk. Because when you feel like a burden, asking for help can feel like danger. But struggling doesn't make you too much. The real issue is the shame that convinces you to suffer quietly so that nobody judges you or gets tired of you. And today we're going to talk about how to deal with that. So let's talk about how to stop feeling like a burden when you're struggling. Hello, I'm Jeremy Godwin, and this is the Let's Talk About Mental Health podcast, full of practical advice for better mental health. This episode is about that awful feeling that shows up when you're struggling, and your mind decides to add a little extra drama to the situation by telling you that needing support makes you difficult or inconvenient or too much. And let's be very clear right from the start, support is not the same as asking someone to rescue you. Struggling does not mean that you failed some sort of imaginary test, and asking for help doesn't mean that you're helpless or useless. We all need support. Now, when you feel like a burden, you might minimize what you're going through or convince yourself that it's better to just stay quiet because other people have enough going on in their lives. And sometimes that can look like strength and independence from the outside, even inside. But underneath it, it may actually be fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of needing too much, or fear that if someone sees how much you're carrying, they might pull away or judge you. So when your mind says, "Oh, I'm being too much," try not to get into an argument with the shame. Just pause and ask, what kind of support do I actually need right now? Because shame can take a real need like reassurance, perspective, practical help, or just a moment to breathe, and it can turn it into proof that you're being difficult. But once you name the need, then you've got something real to work with. Name the need, not the shame. We're going to come back to that idea later, but before we explore how to tackle this stuff, let's name what it actually is, and let's talk about what it means when your needs feel like too much. So, feeling like a burden is the belief that your needs, emotions, pain, or even presence make life harder for other people. It's not just a thought like, "Oh, I'm having a difficult time." It's, "My difficult time is a problem for everyone else." And that distinction is really important because one of them is an experience and the other becomes a judgment about who you are. When you feel like a burden, you don't just notice that you need support, you start judging yourself for needing it. You might tell yourself that you should be stronger, or that other people have enough going on in their lives, or, that you've talked about this thing too many times already. Maybe you convince yourself that staying quiet is kinder, or easier, or less embarrassing. And on the surface, all of that can sound very thoughtful, can't it? Very considerate of you. Very, "Look at me, I'm being so emotionally low maintenance." Except underneath, it's a form of hiding and avoidance. And it can show up in lots of small ways. You might write a message to someone asking for help, but then delete it. You might say, "Oh, don't worry, I'm fine," when you're very clearly not fine. You might apologise repeatedly, or keep checking whether someone sounds annoyed with you or bored or distant. You might feel guilty for needing reassurance, guilty for being sad, guilty for having the same problem again, or guilty for not being the cheerful, happy version of yourself that other people seem to prefer. And the painful thing is that over time, you can start to build an entire life for yourself around not needing too much. You become the person who copes, the person who manages, the person who doesn't ask, the person who says, "Oh, I'll work it out," even when you're exhausted. That can turn into hyper-independence, which is when you rely on yourself so heavily that receiving help starts to feel uncomfortable, unsafe, or even impossible. From the outside, that can look like strength, but very often it's a survival strategy. It says, "I won't need anyone because needing people has hurt me in the past." And that's why this is not just about asking for help. It's about what you've learned to believe your needs actually mean. Now, some people tend to misunderstand this and think the answer here is just, well, stop caring what people think and ask for help. Lovely, great, very neat, and also not even remotely how human beings work. Because if you've been dismissed, criticized, rejected, abandoned, shamed, ignored, or made to feel like your feelings were too much, asking for support may not feel simple or safe. It may feel exposing or risky or even dangerous. So let's be clear. Feeling like a burden does not mean that you actually are one. It means that you're struggling. It means that some part of you has learned that needing support might cost you connection, or you might be judged for it. And once you understand that, you can start working with the fear underneath the belief instead of treating yourself as the problem. It's something that can affect your mental health deeply, really deeply, and doing nothing about it can keep you stuck in a very lonely cycle. So now let's talk about why needing support can feel so unsafe. So the whole feeling like a burden thing has a big impact on your mental health because it turns even the idea of seeking support into a threat. And when that happens, you don't just avoid asking for help. You can entirely organize your life around not needing anything from anyone. Now, that might sound like being strong, and you may even be praised for it. Oh, look at you. You're so capable and independent. You never complain. Lovely compliments, aren't they? Except sometimes what people call strength is actually just someone who learned very early on that their needs were inconvenient, and so they stay quiet about them or they stuff them down. And that's the fundamental truth here. If you keep treating your needs like they're a problem, eventually you're going to start treating yourself like a problem. And we are not meant to carry everything alone. We need connection. We need reassurance. We need people who can sit beside us when life is messy and difficult. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to dump all of our emotions on them or collapse into them or expect them to rescue us from every uncomfortable feeling, right? There's a balance here. We're adults, we're responsible for our own emotional regulation, but it does mean that being supported is part of how we regulate. It's part of how we recover, and it's part of how we keep perspective when things feel heavy. But when you believe you're a burden, you lose access to that. You might be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone because nobody actually knows what you're carrying. You might have people who care about you, but you don't let them come close enough to help. You might say, "I'm fine" so many times that eventually everyone believes it, even you, and then some part of you feels hurt that nobody has noticed that you aren't actually fine. And that's where this pattern can become painful and confusing. So you hide your needs to avoid rejection, but then the hiding itself creates loneliness. A need shows up, and instead of naming it, shame jumps in first and says, "Oh, don't say that. Don't be needy. Don't make it awkward. Don't give someone a reason to leave or to judge you." And so you stay quiet. And then you feel more isolated. Then the struggle gets heavier, and the heavier it gets, the more convinced you become that you are too much, and round it goes like the world's worst merry-go-round. But hiding your needs does not make them disappear. Here's the thing. Feeling like a burden is not proof that you're asking for too much. It's proof that asking for anything has started to feel unsafe. That distinction really matters. Because if you think that you are too much, then you'll probably keep trying to make yourself smaller. You'll minimize your feelings, edit your needs, shrink your expectations, and pretend that you're coping far better than you really are. But if you can see that the problem is shame and fear, your focus changes. It becomes less about being easier to deal with and more about learning how to be honest and clear. That's also where that hyper-independence thing comes in, and it's not just being capable, right? Being capable is great. Please keep being capable. Life is relentless, and someone has to remember to do the laundry. But hyper-independence is when relying on yourself becomes the only option that feels safe. It's really isolating. It's when receiving help feels uncomfortable or suspicious or even threatening. And it's when part of you would rather struggle alone than risk the vulnerability of letting someone know that you need support. And if that feels familiar in any way, I just want to say this very clearly. That response probably came from somewhere. Maybe you had to grow up too quickly. Maybe you were punished or mocked or dismissed when you needed comfort. Maybe someone made you feel guilty for having feelings and needs. Maybe you learned that love was conditional on you being easy or quiet. Maybe abandonment taught you that relying on people is dangerous. Or maybe life has just knocked you around enough that self-protection has become automatic. Understanding that and where it comes from matters, because feeling like a burden can slowly train you out of your own humanity. You stop making space for your own needs. You stop trusting your emotions. You stop believing that support is available to you. And instead of asking, what do I need right now? You ask, how do I become less inconvenient? That's not self-respect. That's self-abandonment dressed up as being considerate. So many of us are trying to manage all the things: stress, anxiety, grief, burnout, family issues, relationship pain, loneliness, and life pressure, while also believing that we have to make it all look neat and tidy for everyone else. But pain doesn't become more manageable just because you make it more palatable and more presentable to other people. Sometimes the most honest, healthy, and self-respecting thing you can do is to stop pretending that you're fine and let someone safe know that you're not fine. Because the goal in life is not to need nobody. The goal is to learn how to meet your needs in ways that are honest, respectful, and sustainable. That means respecting your own needs and respecting other people's capacity. It means not dumping everything onto one person, but also not going the entire other direction and disappearing completely because you're scared of being inconvenient. It is about finding a balance. And we're going to talk about how to do that right after this quick break. And welcome back. Now let's get into the how-to part of this episode and let's talk about how to ask for support without shame taking over. All right, let's talk about how to actually work on this stuff in real life, especially if asking for support feels unnatural or uncomfortable, or even more terrifying than checking your bank balance after a holiday. Because understanding that you feel like a burden is useful and helpful, but it doesn't magically make the feeling disappear. It'd be lovely if it did. But unfortunately, it doesn't. So we have to practice. And here's how to do that. Starting with, stop treating the need as the problem. When you notice yourself thinking, I'm being too much, or I shouldn't need this, I want you to pause and ask yourself, what's the actual need here? Maybe what you need is reassurance, or help making a decision, or someone to listen, or practical support, or maybe it's professional help. The need itself is not shameful. It's simply information. And being clear about what the need is helps you to then make clearer choices. Next, make the ask smaller and clearer. A lot of us avoid asking for support because we think it's going to be enormous or dramatic or emotionally exhausting or just too much, but it doesn't have to be. You can ask in a way that's specific and contained. For example, can I run something by you? Or, I don't need you to fix this, I just need someone to listen. Or maybe you could say, I'm having a rough day and I could use a little bit of reassurance. Clear asks like that are kinder to others and to you, and much kinder than vague distress signals. When you ask clearly, the other person has a much better chance of knowing what you need, and you have a better chance of feeling supported rather than exposed or judged. A clear ask reduces shame. Next, choose the right person for the right kind of support. Not everyone is safe for every part of you. Now, that doesn't mean they're a bad person. And it doesn't mean that you're wrong for needing support. It just means that different people have different capacities and different roles in our lives. Some people are great for practical help, but terrible with emotional nuance. Some people can distract you and make you laugh, but they are not the person for a deep conversation about your abandonment wounds at midnight on a Tuesday, right? Some people can hold space beautifully, and some people can barely hold a group chat together. So, before you ask someone for support, consider, what kind of support do I need, and who is most likely to be able to offer that kind of support safely? That one question can stop you from sharing something vulnerable with someone who has repeatedly shown you that they can't handle it well, and it stops you from using their response as evidence that nobody cares. Find the right person to ask. Next, stop apologizing before you ask for anything. Look, I know why people do it. You're trying to soften the request or prove you're considerate or make it clear that you don't want to be annoying. But when every ask begins with, "I'm so sorry. I know I'm probably being dramatic, but you're probably busy. Maybe this is stupid. I shouldn't even be asking." You're training yourself to believe that your needs require a preemptive apology. They don't. You can be considerate without making yourself sound like a problem. Instead of apologizing, try saying, "Are you free to talk for a few minutes?" Or, "I'm having a hard time and I'd really value your perspective." That's clear, that's respectful, that's not demanding. And it does not require you to enter the conversation like you're apologizing for even taking up oxygen. Next, let other people have limits without turning them into a verdict on your worth. This is a big one, especially if you're skittish about asking for support. If someone then says, "Look, I can't talk right now," shame may immediately translate that as, "Oh, they don't care. I knew I was too much. I should never have asked." But someone's capacity in a particular moment is not the same as your value as a person. So a healthier thought process might be, okay, so they can't talk right now. Is there another time? Or is there someone else I can ask? Is this something I need to write down or take to counseling or manage with a grounding strategy until support is available? That's how you respect someone else's capacity while also not abandoning yourself. Because if you keep treating every lack of availability thing as proof that you're unwanted, you're going to keep training yourself to hide. Nothing changes if nothing changes, and at some point, you need to stop letting shame be the only interpreter in the room, because it does a really terrible job of it. Next, build a support network instead of relying on just one person. Because one person cannot be your therapist, best friend, crisis line, life coach, reality checker, and emotional support animal all rolled into one. That's way too much pressure for one person and for one relationship. And it's too much risk for you if that person is unavailable. So a support network might include a close friend for emotional honesty, another person for practical help, a counselor or therapist for deeper work, a community or group for shared understanding, journaling for processing, and your own grounding tools for immediate regulation. The point is not to have a cast of thousands. This is not one of Madonna's world tours. The point here is to stop placing all your support needs in one place and then feeling shattered when that one place can't hold everything. Next, practice receiving support without immediately trying to repay it. Sometimes when we feel like a burden, we just simply cannot accept care at face value. We rush to say things like, "Oh, I'm fine now," or "Sorry, I won't bring it up again," or "You're amazing, I owe you big time, I'm so sorry." And again, I understand why. It's an attempt to reduce discomfort. But support is not always a debt. Sometimes someone helps you because they care about you. Just let that be true for a moment. So this week, I want you to try one small experiment. Make one clear and contained ask to one reasonably safe person. It's not your least safe person, not the person who makes you feel like a walking inconvenience. Choose someone who has shown some capacity for care, at least. Now, Whatever you ask, keep it specific and simple and straightforward. And then practice not over-apologizing. Practice receiving the response. Practice noticing the discomfort without letting it decide the whole story. So you might say, I've been having a rough time. Do you have 10 minutes this week for me to talk it through? Or, I don't need advice. I just need someone to listen for a bit. Or, I'm trying not to disappear when I'm struggling. So I'm letting you know I'm having a hard day. Now that last one is really powerful because it's honest without being overwhelming. It lets someone in without handing them full responsibility for your well-being. And of course, use your judgment and your discretion here, right? If you're in immediate danger, if you're worried about your safety, or if things feel unmanageable, please reach out to a professional support service in your local area as soon as possible. You can find some listed on my website at ltamh.com/resources, and it's linked in the episode description. Asking for help in those types of moments is not being a burden. Asking for help at any time is not being a burden, but it's taking your safety seriously. Now, for the ongoing emotional work, support from a counselor, therapist, doctor, or other qualified professional can also be a really important and vital part of the picture. But underneath all of this is one much bigger shift. Let independence and support exist together. You can be capable and still need help. You can be strong and still need care. You can be responsible for your life without carrying every difficult thing in silence. Better mental health is not about becoming so self-sufficient that nobody ever sees you struggle. It's about being honest enough to recognize what you need, respectful enough to ask for it clearly, and brave enough to let safe people support you when you need it. So here's what I want you to take away from this episode. Feeling like a burden does not mean that you are a burden. It usually means that some part of you has learned that having needs is risky, so it's trying to protect you. But support is not weakness. Asking for help is not failure. And needing other people at times does not make you difficult or too much. It just makes you a person going through something hard. And hard things become even harder when you force yourself to carry them alone. So, don't carry them alone. What's one need you've been judging yourself for having? And what would it look like to name that need without turning it into shame? Because when you boil it all down, you do not have to disappear just to make yourself easier for other people to love. Each week I like to finish up by sharing a quote about the topic, and I encourage you to take a few moments to really reflect on it and consider what it means to you. This week's quote is by an unknown author, and it is, "You are not a burden. You have a burden." Let me repeat that. You are not a burden. You have a burden. All right, that's it for this week. If you found this episode helpful, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and share it with someone who might need a bit of support right now. And if you'd like to help me keep creating practical advice for better mental health every week, join my Patreon. It's linked in the episode description. Thank you very much for joining me today. Look after yourself and make a conscious effort to share positivity and kindness out into the world, because you get back what you put out. Take care and talk to you next time. Join me next week when I talk about physical anxiety symptoms, and check out my episode on being kinder to yourself when you're struggling next. It's linked in the description. I release new episodes every Sunday, so follow or subscribe to never miss an episode. Let's Talk About Mental Health is an independent program. Discover more at ltamh.com.